Have you ever had an exchange, maybe with your partner, your teenager, maybe your elder parents, or even your boss, but then you walked away feeling completely emotionally drained? Like something heavy was handed to you that you didn't ask for, but you're carrying it anyway. Let's break down why that might be and what we can actually do about it. Welcome to Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran, and this is an It's Good to Gup Shop segment for you and I. This conversation is inspired by soul sister, a best friend, a great person that is sort of working through her own stuff and about emotional honesty, emotional boundaries. And it got me thinking, and I really liked how that conversation went. And I thought, I feel like we could all use a little reminder here. So thank you, friend, for inspiring this one. So what I'd like to start with is let's just picture kind of like how I think about this. So imagine you're packing for a trip and you got the suitcase open and you're supposed to, put in your own essential items, the things that you're taking on this solo trip, except you are throwing in a little bit of your partner's frustration. Maybe you're throwing in your parents' disapproval. You're throwing in your teenager's anger towards everything about you lately. You're throwing in your boss's feedback about how you could have done your job better. You're throwing in all sorts of stuff that your friends have said, haven't said, blah, 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 blah. And now you're trying to shut the suitcase up and it's packed. It's not closing. And now you're hauling this heavy ass suitcase throughout your day, throughout the airport, trying to check it in. And you're like, why am I so tired? Why am I so confused? Why am I just drained? So the drain part, sometimes I find myself saying this, and I hear some of you saying this, I'm so tired, but I didn't even really do a whole lot today. That's what it feels like when we lack emotional boundaries. We just don't show up. We absorb everything and everyone's energy in the room. We don't support, we carry the load, we take on the frustrations and the struggles and the grief and all the things that the people we love so much are going through. And for many of us South Asians, we're raised in a community that's about collective care. We're raised to not question this. We're raised to adjust. We're raised to keep the peace. We're raised to be helpful, even if it means self-abandonment. Okay, so what are emotional boundaries? So we often hear about physical boundaries, right? Like, I need space, don't touch me, I need time. We don't talk a whole lot about emotions also need boundaries too. And they're just the harder parts of who we are to see. And I think that's why sometimes we don't understand them in the same way. They're the invisible lines between what's yours and what's not. Another way to look at this is when I used to oversee short-term and crisis intensive residential programs, I had staff who had to do a lot. They were supporting young people on a 24-hour period. So the life skills, making sure they get to bed, they eat, but also on a therapeutic level. They'd have their families coming in and they would mediate sessions. Some of the staff were doing therapy. And we talked a lot in supervision about having this invisible shield over our hearts. Because as care workers, if we came to work without that shield, we'd get lost in all of our clients' trauma, all the hardships, the really sad stories, it would be really, really difficult to leave our shift and then come back again, and then again and again. So we had to learn how to put the shield over our heart so that we could show up and be present with empathy, with care, but not giving ourselves in a way that we couldn't get ourselves back. So it's learning where your emotions end and someone else's begin. In therapy, we sometimes learn about you're not responsible for other people's feelings. But that's so simple. It's so easy to hear, and it's hard to follow that. Especially in cultures where love often looks like sacrifice, silence, and survival. If love meant saying yes when you wanted to say no, if loyalty meant not questioning elders, then often guilt becomes our default, and boundaries can feel like betrayal. So here we can talk about it's not the sensitivity, it's not the care that's the problem. It's just the lack of filters that many of us weren't taught to put in place. As I had mentioned, the friend that inspired this, we were talking about how she's learning that she absorbs other people's feelings, and it gets to the point where it can be quite draining. And it doesn't mean she's weak. It doesn't mean she doesn't care, she cares too much. It just means that sometimes we're wired to feel so deeply, to absorb tone, emotion, and energy fast. And I think what we want to do today is that acknowledge there's a lot of you out there that are also probably agreeing this is what happens for you too. And so this absorbing the sensitivity isn't the problem. It's the lack of putting emotional boundaries in place that can keep us from burning out. And so sometimes therapists can help us with questions like, okay, am I absorbing? So taking all of what this person before me is sharing, or am I witnessing? Is this mine to carry? Did I even agree to pack this in my suitcase? How did it all get here? These questions start to separate empathy from emotional enmeshment. Okay, so let's talk about attachment versus entanglement. So here's a question I ask myself, and maybe it'll land with you too. Am I emotionally attached or am I emotionally entangled? We can be so committed to our roles. So I'm the oldest Punjabi daughter of immigrants, and we all know that role. I automatically feel like I'm responsible for everything my siblings do, don't do, what my parents say, what they don't say. Is everybody okay? I take that on all the time. Maybe there was a time where that served us. I was asked to, but over time, no one's really asking this of me. But because I'm so accustomed to going there, that's what I've been carrying out for years. And that's a habit, it's a dynamic that I haven't been able to break. And it comes from being the good daughter. This is pressure that many of us Punjabi girls, Indian girls, South Asian girls have been taught from day one. And it's like you got to be this understanding parent. You have to be an understanding partner. You have to be a reliable friend. You have to kind of be able to do it all, and you don't accept anything back from anyone else. And I think a part of this whole being the good child, the good daughter, many of us are brought up in a way of conditional love. So we're taught about behavior-based support. So you're a good kid when you do good things. And it's not you're just a good person in general, but okay, you got an A on that test, you didn't make a mess, somebody complimented how cute you are. All of these things give you, are given this pat on the head and make you the good kid. And so you're striving for these conditional ways to be accepted and loved. And so all these kinds of things play a part as we grow older, or as I've grown older. And maybe some of this resonates with you. So when we are the good daughter, the reliable friend, playing these different roles, we lose the ability to say, okay, this is not mine to hold. Instead, we attach to our partner's mood. So there's codependency develops. and we start to take responsibility for them. If our partner calls us frustrated about their day at work, we feel like that's ours to own, we have to fix, and now we're in a bad mood. If our child's having a tantrum, a bad moment, emotionally we attach to that and we're stressed and having a bad moment. And if our parents disapprove of something that we're doing, especially as adults, we make it proof then that we failed. And our job titles end up being something that we treat as our identity. When something goes wrong, it's not just disappointment, it's like shame, it's guilt, it's the worst thing possible. So when our boundaries are blurry, then everything starts to feel personal. And I think this is why we walk away drained, because we are taking everything said personally, everything done to us. We're centering ourselves in other people's hurt, other people's hard day, and this is how we walk away so drained. We're not necessarily doing this intentionally, but that's often what happens when we don't understand how to put up emotional boundaries. Sometimes therapists call this emotional labor. The unspoken effort, the unspoken effort of not just managing your feelings, but then someone else's too. And when it becomes your default mode, you might feel compassion fatigue. So if you're the fixer of the family, you might be burning out from chronic emotional overfunctioning. There might be even resentment towards all these people you love deeply because you feel like this is your burden, your responsibility. And so as much as you want to care, what ends up happening is the opposite. You say something shitty, crappy, you feel bad for it. You're not there to give them what they need. So your kid's having a tantrum and it's like, shut up, versus trying to emotionally support them and provide them comfort while they're trying to regulate themselves. And I think that's the other thing too, is that maybe the best way to look at it is with children. So sometimes we end up protecting them with our partners and our loved ones, and we don't want them to feel these things. And we're also kind of robbing them from that, because everyone deserves to go through these feelings and feel like they can work through it. And so sometimes that's one way of looking at it, is if I keep protecting my child and saving them from these tantrums of, oh, here, have this, or you're okay, or giving them whatever they are fighting for, I'm not really helping them learn how to regulate themselves, and I'm setting themselves up in the real world. It's okay to work through the tantrum, because we have to teach at a young age how to be able to trust yourself, how to be able to work yourself through tough situations. And sometimes this translates into adulthood, where we don't know how to trust our gut, trust ourselves. And so this is also why we have this codependency with our partner, or even as adults with our parents, because their approval means, okay, I'm doing good. It's that pat on the head that we might have been used to getting when we were young. So these are not personality flaws. These are signs that our emotional boundaries are leaking, and we just need to tweak, do a little bit of that plumbing. So maybe we can think of some tools to protect our peace. So some tools could be, if we want to go back to that suitcase analogy, ways that we can start zipping up that suitcase and not packing in as much as possible. So one thing we can be doing is naming what's happening. Sometimes we abandon ourselves in the moment and don't want to go to the place that we are and acknowledge what's happening. Because if I really want to be there for my friend, I don't want to be in a moment of saying, oh, I'm centering myself around this, or I'm not being the support that I wish I was. So we have to kind of take that ego away, and we have to name what's happening. So I'm overwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed because you shared some of your childhood trauma. I'm overwhelmed because I feel responsible for managing the emotions. I think there's a nice way to understand that. And if you can name it for yourself, you can work through it. But if you can name it with the person you're with, I think that's even beautiful, because we can work through that. I'd rather a loved one share that with me than maybe not respond to a conversation. So there's naming what's happening. You can also use grounding tools. So there's the box breathing. So it's like the 4-4-4. So you inhale for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and then you hold for 4. And what these breathing techniques are doing is they're allowing us to balance our nervous system, giving us a moment from going from the back of the brain, which is a crisis brain. This is where we think about silly things and make poor choices, to get back up to the front of the brain, which helps us plan, make good decisions, sort of figure out what's happening in a more logistic way. So breathing can help work us through our nervous system and get ourselves grounded and present to, okay, now I can get to the next thing here. You can also use your senses to come back to the present. So what am I smelling? What am I feeling? What am I tasting? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? Those kinds of things can also help in the right now, what's happening. And then there's also creating emotional checkpoints. So am I feeling guilty or empowered when I'm walking away from this conversation? That can be really helpful. So guilt can be a signal, but it really should not be the guide. Also, we can script boundaries kindly. So I care about you, I want to be present, but I also need time to process. I'm here to listen, not to solve. A lot of times that's really all what the people around us want. And I think we struggle with emotional boundaries, or we really are absorbing people's energy. We lose sight of that. And again, we jump into the, I got to take care of this role. But many of us want a space to be heard, a sounding board, and not necessarily someone to tell us what to do. And to be honest, if the person before you is in crisis, they're not even at a place to be able to hear solutions or what, because they're at the back of the brain too. So I think sometimes that can be helpful too, is for me to meet the person I care about with where they're at, I gotta also be in check with where I'm at. Another thing we can do is build our inner observer. So sometimes in therapy, they teach us to build our inner wise self. And that's the part of us that can pause and ask, okay, is this reaction coming from the present or the past? That's a good telling place of, am I used to dynamics? This is how I used to observe my caregivers get into situations. These are things from my past and how I would handle things as the, again, roles that I've played as the oldest daughter. Right now, that's what's showing up maybe in a conversation between my partner and I, or with my kid and I. And so I have to understand how to provide empathy and support by being around for you without taking over and deciding how we need to dictate or deal with this situation. So for my South Asian listeners, just like me, you're probably hearing this little voice inside that's saying, okay, but this is all selfish. This won't work. What will people say? What if they think I don't care? Yeah, fair enough. Those are important things that we need to name and we need to work through. And sometimes that is our own fear. And that's something that's been embedded in us through generations. And I think when we're trying to break cycles, break barriers, it's okay to challenge those thoughts that show up in that way of, this isn't going to work. We can reframe them. Boundaries are not disrespect. Emotional separation is not emotional neglect. So when my child's having a tantrum, I'm not ignoring them, walking away from them, letting them endanger themselves. I'm present, I'm aware, I have my own emotions in check, I'm regulating myself so that I can best support them in regulating their emotions. There's a difference there, as you can see. Protecting your own energy, shielding your heart, neatly packing that suitcase so it's not over full. All those things are not selfish at all. They're ways of not abandoning yourself. It's meeting yourself where you're at first. It's that whole put your own oxygen mask on before you put on someone else's. And so we have to gauge, where am I truly at? And maybe today's not the day to be able to have that kind of conversation. Now, I know that doesn't work if you have a dangerous situation or you have a child that is having a huge tantrum. And this is why it's so important to be on this and building this awareness for ourselves so that we know the difference between, okay, this is a safety issue and I got to step in and do something here, versus this is not a safety issue, this can wait. I want to say you can still love your community, you can still love your partner, you can still love your parents and say, I'm not emotionally available right now. That doesn't make you less caring. It makes you, to be honest, it makes you emotionally responsible. So the next time someone says, beta, just adjust, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, what part of me is overfunctioning right now? Am I trying to rescue, over-explain, protect their needs before they even speak? You don't have to carry every emotion that walks in the room. You don't have to overpack your emotional suitcase just to feel loved. You don't have to prove your worth by burning out. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to take up space, even if that space is quiet, even if that space is still and that space is just for you. Maybe this is where I can do a middle fingers up moment. So I think I want to put my middle fingers up to that phrase many of us grew up with, beta, just adjust. I think for too long we have been adjusting from children to adolescents to young adults to beyond, and smiling when we're uncomfortable, hugging unsafe community members, saying yes when we're screaming inside, making ourselves small so others can feel okay. And I don't think we have to fit that shrinking mold anymore. I think we can start to acknowledge and name it and start to address it. It's important that we start to choose clarity over guilt and making decisions because we feel guilt and shame. And to those people that love that, protecting your peace, unapologetically to protecting our peace. So middle fingers up to emotional martyrdom disguised as duty. We're done carrying what was never ours to begin with. This was Middle Fingers Up. I'm your host, Kieran. These conversations are door openers. Thank you for spending It's Good to Gupshup segment with me. If this conversation spoke to you, DM me, send it along someone else's way that maybe could use it. Remember, we're just scratching the surface. If you want to add to this conversation about building emotional boundaries, you have some depth, you have more you want to say, reach out because we want to continue having these conversations. Thank you so much, you guys. Talk to you soon.